Welcome to CyberSecurity Heroes, an IRONSCALES podcast about you, the heroes of cybersecurity. You're about to hear and learn practical and experiential knowledge in our conversations with security leaders and practitioners and other influential InfoSec stars, so we can become more cyber resilient and safer together. CyberSecurity Heroes is brought to you by IRONSCALES, the most powerfully simple email security platform. And I'm your host, Brendan Rudd. And now, let's get into the show. Hey, Christian. Welcome to the show.
Howdy. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, great that you could join us today on CyberSecurity Heroes. I'm really excited to chat with you today about all your insights and the topic at hand of trying to help folks get into the industry. So thank you again for joining us today. Before we dive in, would you mind sharing a little bit about you, your background, and what you're up to these days?
Certainly. Currently, I'm the COO and Chief Information Security Officer of Go Vanguard, which is a boutique cybersecurity firm that performs red teaming services like penetration testing and social engineering. We do, even though we're a small but mighty team, we do work for a lot of multi-billion-dollar hedge funds, international internet service providers, insurance companies, international banks. So we have quite the Rolodex. We focus on providing as much quality insights as possible rather than just going through the motions or doing things like cookie cutter style. So we focus heavily on not just what are the risk results and what are the findings, but more focusing on where do we go from here? What's the action items? What's the roadmap to success?
Got you. Thank you for sharing that. And I've been experimenting with this new icebreaker question. Share a fun fact about yourself. So if you don't mind indulging me.
Sure. Fun fact about myself. I love making things outside of programming. I started programming when I was about 13 or 14 years old. So I do a lot of 3D printing, woodworking, and also quite a bit of metalworking. During the initial COVID-19 pandemic, actually, I did printing of a lot of PPE, probably about 3,000 pieces of PPE. So that was a really fun time.
I've always been fascinated with the whole 3D printing thing. I think there's even a company that can 3D print houses now for low-cost housing.
It's absolutely fantastic. And just kind of relating that back to cybersecurity and pen testing and whatnot, hey, you can even do 3D printing now of lock picking tools and that kind of stuff for physical penetration testing. It's so neat.
Wow, super cool. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. I guess we could maybe start with a fairly light question before going deep into the topic. How did you get into cyber?
Wowee. So I got into cybersecurity, I think initially from the get-go when I was about 13 or 14. I started with Visual Basic Programming and then went to C and making different applications and making applications that could prank people. Me and my brothers, we used to play a lot of LAN video games, that kind of stuff with one another, and making stuff like that to mess with one another and take control over each other's computers. I never had taken it quite seriously until when I was a network administrator for a large multi-specialty medical group. And I was just asked one day, hey, we haven't done any security assessments or anything like that. Can you run with this? And I started out like a lot of other people, which is Googling it and faking it till you make it and that kind of jazz. And that was probably about a decade ago now. And then I joined Go Vanguard back in about 2014, 2015, and then started doing serious penetration testing and social engineering work and helping people build their blue teams and whatnot.
Awesome. So you're pretty much self-taught, that's how you got into the industry?
I made a lot of Google in it. Google is more of my teacher than anything, but yeah, I would say so. I didn't have the opportunity, unfortunately, of having any mentors in the cybersecurity space. I think that's particularly why CyberSecurity Heroes and what you guys are doing has a place in my heart of trying to help people avoid the same pitfalls and mistakes that I have.
That's awesome. Yeah, which sort of brings me to my next question. I'm seeing, and I'm sure you as well, a lot of posts lately on LinkedIn addressing the challenges of where to start when wanting to study InfoSec, because I guess since the time you started 10 years ago, the industry has exploded. There's a lot more to navigate and deep dive into the complex ecosystem of subjects, free resources, and endless certs and boot camps. So I would love to get I'd love to get your advice on how would you recommend people navigate all this information to get the best and most efficient start into the industry?
That's a fantastic question. Information overload, especially nowadays, is an incredible challenge. And sometimes it's kind of like a
good problem to have.
It's a good problem, but it's like having an encyclopedia at your disposal and then you highlighting everything in the encyclopedia or in a textbook. If the highlighter is highlighting everything, then you're not really focusing on the important tidbits. And I think first and foremost, people, what they should do is they should ask themselves, what's their 3-year and 5-year plan for themselves, career-wise? Because that's going to define where you need to then start focusing. Usually it's going to be...
Sorry to interrupt you, but as someone who's just getting in, how can you think that far ahead before you have any idea of what you actually want to do? Like, how do you know that? How can you plan so far ahead?
Well, so I think somebody should ask themselves, do they see themselves in a role of being a communicator or being more like an engineer or someone who's in a position of leadership? And also, do they see themselves, and with anything, someone has to have an initial foundational knowledge, but the foundational knowledge of, do you want to be more on a red team or a blue team type of thing? Because that's going to carve out a big knowledge chunk of where to focus first. I'm not saying that the other side isn't important. It is, right? But focusing on the particular domain that's most interesting to you. So I think if somebody asks themselves, do I find that doing forensics work, having to investigate something as if I'm a detective is very interesting, engaging, and I'm going to enjoy that? Or do I think it's going to be a really interesting thing to try to break into an organization and try to emulate a malicious actor? Or trying to help protect organizations by detecting and containing malicious actors? I think when somebody starts to do that initial research into just the different positions that exist out there, right, and what the salaries are associated with those, when they come up with a 3-year or 5-year plan, where do you want to go? That'll help them focus to, okay, red team, blue team. And then from there, probably my greatest recommendation after that would be starting with some simple tracks from the CompTIA, that kind of stuff, because that's going to get somebody to an initial foundation knowledge set where then they can start carving out, okay, maybe some of these tips and tricks that were provided on LinkedIn are a little like too foundational and I already get those basics, right? Versus, okay, you know what, these are some really good gems here.
Yeah, that helps to set the context or the plan, I think, from a high level. Like, I guess an analogy could be like if you wanted to study to become a chef. Okay, chef is a bit too broad. Do you want to get into pastry or Italian? Like, where do you want to specialize in? What type of cuisine and what type of cooking?
I'm great on the grill, but I can't bake worth a damn, right? So yeah, and I don't think it requires, again, somebody to be, already in the industry to understand just a couple of those components there. Usually, I think a couple initial hours of research into what types of careers exist under cybersecurity first, and then seeing what they gravitate towards. Obviously, what's going to best leverage their current strengths is also important too. I would generally also say, hey, it doesn't hurt to have a mentor, but not everyone's provided that opportunity. One of the things that I do think works out quite well, though, is when you find somebody that you think might be a reasonable mentor, reaching out to them on LinkedIn and asking them what's worked well for them versus what hasn't worked so well for them, especially if they're in the domain or the career that you're looking to get into. This way, they're going to tell you very specifically about their own experiences, and that's going to be, I think, a really helpful guiding path. Because honestly, there's not one knowledge source. There's not one, book that you can read that's going to tell you everything. And there is so much information out there. So just trying to consume all the information is going to be a futile task.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up mentorship, because I've been having discussions with a few folks who really opened up my eyes, re-evaluating what mentorship looks like. And what I really like about what these folks are saying is that look for someone who's a few steps ahead of you. Don't look at someone 5 years or 10 years ahead of you, because the industry has changed so much. They probably don't remember. The information may be less relevant. So look for someone who just got into cyber and see if they can help you sort of backtrack or reverse engineer the steps they took, because it's fresh in their mind and it's super relevant to like what you're trying to achieve. So the advice was look for someone a few steps ahead of you versus years or decades. Not to say that they won't be valuable at all, but I just thought it was an interesting sort of recalibration of what a mentor is.
Yeah, I do definitely concur with that, because when sometimes you talk to somebody and they're like, oh, I've been doing this thing for 20 years. The question is, okay, if you've been doing that thing for 20 years and you're doing almost that same exact thing over that period of 20 years, is that necessarily the definition of success, right? Should one be more accomplished or in the next level at that particular point, right? Obviously that's up to debate and one's own kind of like personal preferences. Maybe they enjoy where they are at and they'd like to stay in that particular domain. I've had some people where I've asked them, I say, hey, do you want to be like a security engineering manager? How do you feel about managing a team? And they're like, I really enjoy just being a senior security engineer. I want to be an elite hacker type of person. I don't want to have to worry about managing a bunch of people and the politics around it. Okay, I totally respect that. But yeah, focusing to somebody, I would say no greater than 5 years ahead of you is going to be super duper helpful. And then obviously when it comes to communications and collaboration, always having people at your certain level and going through the same strategy and the same struggles and whatnot as yourself. And then people even below you mentoring others who are starting to get into something, right? So I've seen a lot of somebody just got into cybersecurity, but they're already starting to mentor somebody else who is just starting to dip their toes in, which when you like educate somebody else, you're mentoring somebody else, it helps make you more confident and codifies your own knowledge and expertise.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I've also seen a lot of people sharing, how they got in, and it's great to see such a tightly knit community in the cyber community. So speaking of which, what's a misconception that most new to cyber folks believe?
That's a good one. I think there's a lot of them. But I think the biggest misconception that I tend to talk about, and I'm more of, I think, a black sheep or different than most people, so perhaps folks don't agree with me on this one, but is that cybersecurity always requires somebody who has 10 years of experience of doing this and that and all that kind of jazz. And that somebody who only has a year or two of knowledge and expertise in the domain of cybersecurity can't provide much value. I think that's probably a big misconception. And I think there's also a overvaluation put on hard skills. Hard skills are super important. I come from a background naturally of a lot of hard skills and then focusing to my soft skills of communication and being able to collaborate with people and that kind of stuff. But now that I think about it and I reflect on my own past, if I had the soft skills to start with, it would have made it actually a lot easier to acquire the hard skills, because I would have been able to better seek out mentors and people who are going through my same struggle and that kind of stuff. And then also being able to best demonstrate, my value to a potential employer beyond just this is the exact specific certification I got. So I think that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions I have seen.
That's interesting. How much do you think companies care about soft skills? Do many companies value soft skills, or is it still sort of a nice to have versus the technical skills?
Good question. Certainly companies are not a monolith, right? There's a lot of different companies that are, depending on their size and their vertical, are going to have a different culture, right? And so like a organization that's fairly large, they're going to look for more hard skills out of the blue team and everyone that they're hiring, because their human resources processes is a very conventional process of skimming a resume and looking for particular buzzwords, looking for certifications, looking for some type of educational background that might be relevant, right? But usually even after that point, once somebody's gotten past that initial round of HR looking at the resume and going on from there, when you talk to like actual cybersecurity experts who are really engaged and enthusiastic, they're willing to overlook the lack of certifications or computer information systems background or computer information science background if the individual is passionate, right? And they can talk the talk and walk the walk a little bit more than somebody who just had the certification. Actually, I would say that probably the best people I know in the realm of cybersecurity don't actually have a formal education in computer information science or anything like that. It's like they got like a degree in like botany or like biology or something like that that has no like relevance to their actual career. So I would say that if somebody is going to try to focus, though, on organizations that care more about communications, it's going to be the smaller startups. Anyone who's a software as a service, platform as a service provider, I think they care more about customer service, right? Which means inevitably they care more about communications. And then I would say, not too unlike my firm, there's a lot of organizations out there that focus on pen testing and whatnot. And it's like, okay, yeah, you found a vulnerability and maybe you exploited it, but like, how can you communicate that, right, to some CEO or COO, right, who doesn't know what that means? How can you communicate where that impacts the top line or the bottom line for the organization? So I think where somebody should try to focus, at least initially, is on smaller technology providers, venture capital-backed companies, smaller pen testing groups and cybersecurity firms provide more of a hands-on, high-quality boutique type of experience, and focus less to large enterprises where they have to go through a standard bureaucratic human resources evaluation process, and it's going to be tough to have your resume pass that initial sniff test.
So it brings up a few interesting thoughts for me. Like if we will put soft skills to the side in terms of job searching, just because you get a job doesn't mean you're going to be successful without soft skills. So it's actually, regardless of whether you think you need it for getting a job, you're probably going to be more successful with soft skills once you land the job. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, certainly. The reason being is, one, it's going to allow you to collaborate better with your teammates, right? And better be able to seek feedback where you are having challenges in your new role or position, right? And trying to improve based off that feedback. And it's certainly also going to help when it comes to negotiation and sales. And when I say negotiation and sales, we all do sales and negotiation in our daily lives. Even when it comes to your partner, you have to negotiate, you have to compromise on, hey, what are we having for dinner tonight? And that kind of stuff, right? Sales in the sense of selling to your partner, right? That you are a valuable individual to be partnered with and to spend time with and that kind of stuff. We even sell to ourselves and our own personal self-esteem and whatnot. So those social skills, I think, really help kind of sand down the rough edges where somebody's seeking. I've seen a lot of folks who have fantastic hard skills and expertise, but because they can't collaborate well with others, that means that they're kind of like in this silo, they're in this box, and they have a difficult time delegating things and gain knowledge out of their brains. Probably actually some of the worst employees that I've ever had are individuals who are super, super smart, but you can't get any knowledge out of their head. You can't get them to write anything down. And so it's almost like this kind of artificial job security. And I'm looking for a team player. I'm looking for somebody who's going to help grow the team, educate the rest of the team, and collaborate. And someone who is not afraid to talk to customers a little bit and provide them a little bit of insight and be friendly about it, rather than coming off as some condescending expert.
Yeah, I think what you said now really taps into a lot of things that I hear from my guests about elitism and lots of egos in cybersecurity. And I think, what you said about that quasi job security, it's not really going to keep you safe by hoarding information.
Yeah. The moment someone starts referring to themselves as an expert in some elitist way all the time is the moment that they've become complacent and they stopped learning. Certainly cybersecurity, but just technology as a whole is something that's always evolving, growing, and changing, and you have to stay on the bleeding edge, right? My organization's name is Go Vanguard, right? Being on the vanguard, right? On the front lines and bleeding edge technology and staying up to date and what works and what doesn't, right? And being able to try new things that maybe won't work out and that you'll fail, right? When someone considers themselves as an expert all the time, they tend to become complacent and then also risk adverse of trying new things out, which means that eventually whatever techniques and whatever they're doing gets stale and can't keep up with what malicious actors are actually doing. I think a really good example of that is the initial concept that occurred in the early to late 2010s, where you had it where buy a bigger firewall and intrusion prevention system. That's going to solve all your problems, and network segregation is going to solve all your problems, when that completely didn't have any consideration in mind for things like mobility, right? And especially in a post-COVID world where there's endpoints and devices everywhere.
Yeah, I wanted to come back for a second to the discussion around misconceptions. You were talking about 10 years of experience, not necessary for every role. I've seen a lot of polls and posts on LinkedIn where I'm actually going to quote one right now just to sort of get your feedback on this. Just give me a second here. I'm going to keep all the participants anonymous just to play it safe here, not to upset anyone. So this post goes like, it's silly to think that junior folks can't do any meaningful work on a security team. Cybersecurity isn't an entry-level job. I hear people say, I have to train juniors for 6 months before I see any return on investment. I'm continuing with this quote. I'm sorry, but what? You're saying that there's nothing a junior level person can do that would benefit your team? There's nothing they could do to help improve your company's security posture? How about asset inventory, data inventory, documentation, or clearing up alerts from detection systems? How about writing IT security response playbooks or filling out security questionnaires? I'm not going to continue with the rest of it because I think you get the idea, but I just want to quickly give you a response from someone on the post that I think is creating this environment where people are, feeling despondent. This person said, no entry-level person would know how to do any of this. Not even just the asset inventory. How would they know what assets to inventory? Do they know how to access the console of a router, a firewall? How about cloud resources? And then there's other items mentioned are even more complex. Only large companies such as the Fortune 1000s have a cybersecurity budget big enough to afford to bring in entry-level people and have enough bandwidth to train them onto a successful roadmap. And then therein lies the hard truth. 99% of all business in America are small businesses. Most businesses don't have the means to hire an information security professional. And if they do, they would have to be experienced, not entry level. So I think this post pretty much covers and hits on every single misconception I think we've heard of. However, I do want to give this person the benefit of the doubt and to get another person's insights and feedback to all the response and the post in general.
Well, first and foremost, I totally still understand that the person responding to that with their retort, and in its own way, it does have a sense of logic to it. But I think that there's also, again, going back to communication, the person's focusing on small business. What do they mean by small business exactly? What's that demarcation point? Your Joe Schmo pizzeria and your mom and pop shops and whatnot are not going to be able to afford a cybersecurity expert anyways, right? They're usually going to have to seek out a vendor for something. And usually they're not even going to do that until some type of regulatory requirement twists their arm or until they're affected by a cybersecurity incident personally. And then they start to see the value in security, right? They're not just going to inherently understand the value in security. They're too focused on running their own business. So I think that they're perhaps just narrowly scoping it a little bit with the definition of a small business and thinking too much of mom and pop shops. And then also independently, they're assuming that, okay, this is a junior cybersecurity person on their own, right? Certainly a junior cybersecurity person on their own doing those things, not knowing where to start out, especially if they're having to Google everything. I'm not going to say that there's no chance of success, but it's certainly going to be, it's going to be certainly quite challenging because they don't have any past expertise to work off of or tooling or anything like that. They're starting in an environment that's a mom and pop environment, right, from scratch, right? Certainly that would require, honestly, a vendor to be brought in. That being said, though, I think that if you have a junior person, right, working alongside, right, individuals that are already as part of the existing cybersecurity team, they're going to be set up well for success, right? Asset inventory, it's not like that person that has to do it from scratch. Like there's no previous process or tooling or information in place. The current individuals in the organization can provide some initial guidance of, hey, at least even if there was almost none, but at least a little information, hey, these are the 5 locations that our business is located at. Can you go to each closet and take pictures of everything? And once you come back and you take pictures of everything, we'll go through and we'll discuss everything that's in those racks there. We'll start creating an asset list so that we have that together. So I do think that Again, the retort is just a little narrow-minded in its focus and scope and thinking too much of a small business, somebody flying on their own completely, when the value that inherently can be most extracted from a new person is going to be who are their mentors, who is guiding them. And if cybersecurity, it is very novel. Yes, there is a lot of nuance to it, but the things with the asset inventory management and going through and updating passwords and writing reports or doing some research on a particular thing is a lot of monkey see, monkey do, right? Like with any on-the-job type of training and learning. And certainly the thing is, hey, I wish I could have more people where I could say, hey, jump into our one password. I want you to go through every password that's this age or this level of complexity. I need you to go change that for me. Oh, hey, these asset listing. Okay, can you go here and go update it, right? And just take a look at these checkboxes here. Certainly, those things are still super valuable, and they free up your really expensive cybersecurity experts from having to do tedious tasks. So if there's a great value there, it's the opportunity cost that you have an expert who no longer has to do something super tedious.
Yeah, again, I'm no cybersecurity expert. It feels like to me that people are not wanting to be creative in how to solve the problem. And I don't know if the 3 to 4 million, whoever you're asking on the day of unfilled seats is not enough of an impetus to think outside the box. I'm not sure what, will be.
Yeah. Also, when somebody's done cybersecurity work for a long time and maybe they had to walk a hard path like myself, it's like the sense of like when a doctor, you call them Mr. rather than doctor. Like, whoa, I did this for 12 or 16 years or how many years? I didn't do this, right, to be called Mr. I'm a doctor, right? I think there's a lot of everyone's got a chip on their shoulder when you've had to walk the hard path and you want to see other people walk the same hard path, that kind of stuff. Technology has changed quite a bit since, knowledge and how to communicate and how to collaborate has changed significantly. The significant demand in the cybersecurity space has increased by, several orders of magnitude. So I think people thinking like being closed, it doesn't help to be closed-minded and just say that this is a difficult thing and you can't and people can't get into it. I think that's shunning people and that's narrowing down the pool of possible talent. What we should be doing is trying to get people enthusiastic about cybersecurity, right? Even PBS and CISA has videos, educational content talking about cybersecurity for children like my 9-year-old daughter. Don't tell me you can't get people, interested in it and engage and have inexperienced people, right, who only have a couple years under their belt provide a lot of value. That's obviously, my own experience of running a multi-million-dollar business tells me different, right? But I think that there's a lot of other companies out there, especially a lot of small pen testing firms and boutique firms that would agree with me on that as well.
Mm-hmm. And just to clarify, your team is focused on red teaming, and from your general experience, where do you see companies having the most bang for their buck hiring entry-level folks into red teams and even into blue team environments?
I think it's going to all be dependent on the size of the actual business and the industry that they're in. So a lot of times I think organizations need at least a generalist, right? Somebody who understands cybersecurity and compliance from a 10,000-foot view perspective, right? This way they know where to get the right resources and the right knowledge and find the right answers to tough questions, right? If you hire, I think, somebody who's too down a specific niche, they're not going to have a lot of guidance when it comes to the bigger picture. For example, asking a pen tester about like ISO 27001 compliance is not going to work out quite well. Or even if you ask a conventional pen tester sometimes of how to build a robust cybersecurity program for, let's say, a fast food franchisee type of style of business model, they're going to have a difficult time with that, right? So I would say stick to initially one, generalists, and then two, honestly, there's tons of great vendors in there that can start to set up that initial foundation of a cybersecurity program and then point you in the right direction for how to best maintain that, or perhaps even assist you in maintaining it.
Got you. I've actually interviewed a few folks that have actually started people off on phishing analysis in their first few weeks of onboarding and training. I also did an interview with one of your team members, Travis DeForge, and who came to your company without any red teaming or security knowledge. Can you speak to like some of the early training and projects that you would give when starting to train new folks?
First and foremost, good documentation. My organization prides itself on being big open source contributors, where there's a particular package. It's a semi-automated pen testing framework called Legion that's in Kali Linux by default, created and maintained. We got a lot of great open source stuff that we maintain, but one of them is this big like InfoSec encyclopedia and getting started in cybersecurity and that kind of stuff. We right from the get-go was like, hey, what are all these tidbits? Let's start writing this down so it's going to help other people out. So I think that helped set Travis up and a lot of other teammates up for success. And then every time somebody goes through the ringer of learning cybersecurity stuff, okay, cool. And what else do you want to contribute? Like, I'm sure that our getting started guide to cybersecurity wasn't perfect. Hey, do you want to put something in? So you got a lot of people collaborating together about those tips into one particular central repository and domain. And it's specific to our organization, right? What we're looking for. So it's not like it's the same type of noise that someone might get from like a LinkedIn or something like that, where there's too much information, because again, it's specific to our company's processes, what specific hard skills are like interesting to us, right? Hey, I don't want everyone to become a network infrastructure engineer here. I want you to focus more on maybe Linux and Windows exploitation rather than conventional network infrastructure exploitation. So that is, again, starting with good documentation inside first. Cybersecurity people and technology people in general don't really love writing things down. That can be really tough. So including myself, we have to get over that. And then in regards to what else I think set Travis and a lot of our other teammates up for success is going through and showing them what the results of something that's been executed to completion. In our case, again, we're a red teaming company, so we do a lot of pen testing. So I showed him what our pen test reports look like, and then also what our competitors' pen test reports look like. And sitting down and being able to draw from those insights and talk about the methodology, talk about the process. And the way we usually do our pen test reports are done as like a narrative, like it's a story that's being told, right? Of, hey, I started with the open source intelligence gathering and a reconnaissance, and then I found this, and then I found that, and then I was able to exploit this and laterally move from here to here to gain access to this type of data, and showing the evidence and showing the homework every step of the way. So how can somebody do that on the blue team side? Okay, show them what a properly set up a security information event management solution is versus a security information event management solution that's not fully set up and completed. That allows them to now, in their own way, when they go to work on something, what completion should look like, what the end goal should actually look like, what's the quality and the expectations that's being set there. So as they start to do their own discovery, they know at what point they know enough and what they've done is good enough. So a lot of demonstration, I think, is really good. Monkey see, monkey do.
The last time we spoke, you also mentioned the importance of showcasing yourself as a critical thinker. How can you demonstrate critical thinking in an interview? So I know we're going back and forth a little bit here, but I just wanted to cover this question because it was interesting for me.
Yeah. To be perfectly honest, the best way to demonstrate critical thinking in any regard is to ask really good questions. Or at least if it's not going to be a really good question, ask a question that wasn't already just obviously answered, because it shows that someone is following along and they're starting to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Too often I see a lot of people, they'll talk and they'll say, I just said like security information event management solution rather than saying SIM. Right? People throw all these type of acronyms around all the time: SIM, EDR, NVR, blah, 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 blah. And a lot of other people just shake their heads and they feel like embarrassed about asking, what does that word mean? Honestly, the people who are the best critical thinkers is when jargon's thrown at them, they go, hey, stop me for 1 second there. What's that piece of jargon mean? What's that term mean? Okay, can you explain to me what a security information event management solution does beyond the word in itself? What's its purpose and function, right? Can you give me a couple of examples of those different types of solutions that might exist on the market? And critical thinking is super important. Context of who's going to be looking at this? Who's this going to be actually helping? What's the actual end goal and objective here, right? And that's how a lot of times like you can get around. Unfortunately, a lot of pitfalls that occur in cybersecurity is security through obscurity. And purposely trying to make things like look complex, right? And the moment you start to exercise good critical thinking, it's that security through obscurity, it's not going to make sense. That's going to be not going to be helpful. So a lot of people are like, hey, I'm going to change up how our email addresses are right now. Rather than first name dot last name, I'm going to make it first 3 characters of the first name and then dash and then the last name. And then I'm going to put a random number at the end. You might think that's cool and whatnot and good security practices, but like at the end of the day, right? Those email addresses are going to get out there. There's going to be a couple of them. The malicious actors then going to be able to determine the schema in which you're creating your email addresses, and it's something that's easily identifiable, right? So you maybe put 3 more additional minutes of time on their plate. You know what I mean? So I think those types of things are really helpful for demonstrating critical thinking.
You also went on to say that it was equally important to be resourceful and a tinker.
Yeah. So always trying new things and encouraging failure and learning from your failures. So one of the things I always tell somebody when they're looking to get into cybersecurity as a quick tip of how to learn really, really quickly on the hard skill stuff, I say, hey, what do you use at home for your home firewall? Is it provided by your internet service provider? Okay, that's a problem. Replace it, right? Go set yourself up with a Netgate pfSense appliance, or go get a Sophos firewall, or do something like a Ubiquity firewall, right? Now I want you to configure it. Go configure it. And what they'll learn very quickly is what are all these features? What are these bells and whistles, right? What do these configurations mean? How can I make it more secure? And then also, initially, like learning about network infrastructure and whatnot, they're going to be really motivated because their internet's down and not functional, right? And when you don't have that, that really messes up your dopamine. I would always say that people should be experimenting with technology and cybersecurity in their personal lives. Hey, be interested in what information's out there about you or your family members. There's a ton of people finder sites out there that have information on who you are, every address you lived at, every phone number you've had, all your email addresses, who your relatives are, that kind of stuff. Go start exploring that. And if you can take your own personal cybersecurity posture and get that in line, right? Improve your own life. What makes you think you can do that for a business? So start with yourself first. That's why I tell a lot of people is how can you practically improve your own life? Does your computer have antivirus on it that's not like Windows Defender default? Tell me about, what you're doing for your Wi-Fi, or using just a regular pre-shared key or something like that. Like, really? If someone starts to apply those principles to their own life, then they'll find themselves quickly being able to provide value for businesses as well.
So as we wrap up here today, do you have any sort of final thoughts to both job seekers getting into cyber and also for companies? Anything you'd like to share quickly with those 2 audiences as we wrap up here today?
Certainly, people are going to have to go beyond the certifications and the boot camps. Even if someone was focusing on hard skills, you're going to have to be passionate about what you do. Cybersecurity is a really, really tough gig, especially if you're on the blue team. All the time dealing with data breaches, dealing with security incidents, users who are always going to click things that they shouldn't click and whatnot. So it's incredibly stressful and sometimes even demoralizing. So it's going to be helpful to have a sense of passion in improving the world and doing the right thing. And that means, again, you got to go beyond the boot camps and the certifications and play with things and have an interest in things. And again, starting with cybersecurity in your own personal life is going to be much more helpful at first. And then also, again, when you go through things that are reports and cybersecurity documentation, and you're trying to sell yourself, think about who your audience is and how much they really care about cybersecurity. Unfortunately, a major pitfall of individuals in cybersecurity is assuming that everyone else cares about cybersecurity as well. I've had plenty of experiences where I've sat down with an executive and I say, yeah, and you guys going to need to implement MFA, and we all know why MFA is important. And they look at me and they go, no, why is MFA important? Please tell me. And so you need to be ready to describe that to executives, and basically all the way from a vulnerability and how can that impact the organization's top line and bottom line via a reputational thing or regulatory fines or whatever. That's going to get you started in your career a lot faster.
Awesome. Some final thoughts here on the success that you've had with your programs, bringing in new folks. Like, how many people have you trained up from zero knowledge and brought into Go Vanguard?
Here at our organization, about individuals. In the past, or other organizations I've worked at, and other people that I've just helped out in my free time who work at other places, probably a good 30 to 40 people over the last 10 years. I've personally sat down and educated and taken time to work with, and no string attached or anything like that, just trying to provide good insight and put good into the world. That being said, it's not even just from a regular conventional cybersecurity standpoint, but also data privacy and compliance, regulatory compliance, right? Governance risk and, compliance management. I've had it where I've worked with people who were previously, and now they're the best compliance person I know, who has easily more knowledge and expertise and provides more valuable than somebody who was doing it for 15 years. So people should definitely not get discouraged when they come into the industry. They still need to prove their worth, and they're going to have to be passionate about it, but it's certainly not an anomaly, I think.
Awesome. It's great to hear those success stories. So thank you so much, Christian, for joining us today on Cybersecurity Heroes. If anybody would like to connect with you, pick your brain more on this topic, ask for some help, what's the best way for folks to reach out?
Probably the best way to reach out to me is honestly via LinkedIn, right? It's at linkedin.com/Christian C. Scott. I'm the one and only Christian C. Scott over here at Go Vanguard. But that being said, also our organization, Go Vanguard, is GoVanguard.com. That's GoVanguard.com. I always got to make sure I don't misspell it because I'm goofy like that and dyslexic. Yeah. But yeah, so certainly though, I would say that the only reason why I don't provide my email address here is because by default, all Gmail, Yahoo, Hotmail, I block, right, for spam prevention and whatnot. So LinkedIn is usually the best though. And honestly, thank you for connecting me with a lot of good folks to mentor and whatnot. So it means a lot being on Cybersecurity Heroes today.
Thank you. Appreciate you taking the time out to chat with us today. So thanks again. And to everyone on Cybersecurity Heroes, we'll see you next time.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Bye now.
That's a wrap for this episode of Cybersecurity Heroes. Practical and experiential knowledge on a day in the life of security heroes. Catch our next episode by subscribing or following through your favorite podcast platform. If you're listening on Apple Podcast, please leave a rating for the show. They really help a lot. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.